So based on all that we have discussed so far on the analysis of various circuits using Laplace transforms and understanding the system function, understanding the role of poles and zeros, in this class we will just very briefly look at what is the role of the poles and zeros in explaining or in helping us deduce what is the stability of the system. Okay. Okay. So in general, the definition of a stable circuit, is this something you've studied in signal systems? So a circuit is stable if its impulse response is bounded. Okay, that means h of t converges to a finite value as t tends to 0. And if the system is unstable, then it grows without bound as t tends to infinity. That means normally I have a circuit. Say I have an RL circuit, and it's a one port network. We have studied this very thoroughly by now. And if I give an impulse response input, that means V naught delta of t, then I know that the Laplace transform of delta of t is just equal to 1. So the Laplace transform of the impulse response is nothing but the transfer function of the system, right? The transfer function or network function. So that's what this definition is saying. If I consider a circuit such that h of t converges to a final value, for the when it says that h of t is the impulse response, okay? So when I say impulse response, it means transfer function of the system. So mathematically, you say limit as t tends to infinity, h of t should be finite. So how can I get the impulse response of this RL circuit? First, I apply an impulse function. Laplace transform of that is equal to 1, or in this case, it's V naught delta of t. So Laplace transform is V naught. So what is the response? I'm measuring the current I of t. This is the impulse response, okay, I of t. Because my input is an impulse function, I'm measuring the response of the system, and this is the impulse response, I of t. When I take the Laplace transform, I get I of s is equal to V naught divided by R plus Ls. This we already know. And therefore, if I transform it back, then this term R plus Ls becomes exponential of minus RT over L U of t. And so now I've got this impulse response. So now if I put limit as t tends to infinity, if I apply to this formula here, then as t tends to infinity due to the exponential value, this term tends to 0. Therefore, you can say that this is a stable system. And this is something we already know because I have a resistor and an inductor. There are all passive elements. There is no active element. So whenever I have a circuit of passive elements, it always has to be stable, right? Because unstable means what? The output is going on increasing with time. And if I have to increase the output, then there has to be some source of amplification. Some active device has to be in the network. As long as I'm dealing with passive elements, I expect that it'll always be stable. There is no question of becoming unstable. Okay. So this is just a simple experiment or example to elucidate what is this concept of stability. So if I ask you ever in an exam that is this circuit stable or not, what you will have to do is you have to apply an impulse function and find out what is the Laplace transform, and then based on that find what is the impulse response, and then tell me that as limit as t tends to infinity, is this tending to some finite value? It need not have to be 0, it can be a finite value. For example, if my impulse response for some reason, if it were I of t is equal to V naught u of t, this could also be some impulse response, right? Where would this happen? Supposing I just have an inductor, okay, and then I've applied some initial impulse over here, so some V naught u of t to the circuit. Then what I would say is that I of s is equal to 1 over s times L, and therefore I of t is u of t divided by L. Okay. Therefore, this is the same thing as what I have written over here. I of t, I'm sorry, where was that? Yeah, okay. So I of t is the response is equal to V naught into u of t. So as I had some value V naught over here, this should have been V naught over SL, and this is V naught u of t divided by L. And that makes sense, right? I have an inductor. An inductor is an element that cannot dissipate energy. So I put some impulse initially and it caused some current to flow. And that once the current starts flowing due to the continuity of the inductor, the current just flows infinitely. It never stops because there is no dissipation. In reality, if you buy an inductive wire, a coil of wire, then that wire, in addition to having inductance, it also has some physical resistance. That is what is shown by this circuit over here that I talked about. When I said it's an RL circuit, this could have simply been an inductor that you bought from the shop, some long inductor. And because of the length of the wire, it has some resistance and inductance also. So the inductive property is captured by this element L, and the resistive property of the same wire is captured by this value R. And so there is dissipation of energy. Wherever there's a resistance, it's always like friction. So there is dissipation of energy. But if it were a pure inductor, which is a very ideal case, then there would be no dissipation of energy. And in that case, you can see that the impulse response is V naught into U of t. And U of t means it's a constant value. So this is also bounded, right? So in the first example, I showed minus RT by L. That is bounded because of exponential decay. As t tends to infinity, this tends to 0. And this function, as t tends to infinity, it tends to V naught. And that is also a finite value. So this is also a bounded function. Bottom line is, if you ever find a resistor, inductor, capacitor, you can expect that the system will always be finite. Okay. Now, if we want to do this more generally, that means we are talking about the transfer function, then you know that the formula for transfer function is some numerator divided by denominator, and the numerator can be left as it is, and the denominator, what we did when we worked on the method of residues, is that we factorized it into s plus p1 p2 so on, right? And then we write this expression as a by s plus p1 plus b by s plus p2, and then find out what are the residues. So right now we will not go into that, but the fact is that in the denominator, each of these are the poles. And similarly in the numerator, you have all the zeros, if I were to factorize this, okay? So whenever s is equal to minus z1 or minus z2, this term becomes 0, and so those are called the zeros. And similarly in the denominator, whenever s is minus p1, p2, it becomes, the system blows up, the network function. So the poles of h of s are minus p1, minus p2, as you follow what is happening over here in the denominator. And then we know that by method of residues, we would actually split it up like this. Okay. So in the previous session, I discussed about how you don't need to solve the full problem. Just by observation, you can figure out where are the poles of the system. And based on the poles of the system, you can figure out what is the response of the system. And the response of the system over here, if I write it as s plus p1 and so on up to s plus pn, then I can say that my impulse response is going to look like this. Correct? Is everybody following so far? Any doubt? Because this is the only part to understand. After this, everything is very straightforward. Because we started off by saying that the impulse response of a system should be finite. So I have some function, some network function, h of s. And what is the impulse? Whenever I want to find the response of a system, I wrote on top over here that I have some excitation that is being applied. So did I write that anywhere? Yeah. I said that the transfer function is nothing but the response of the system. Okay. Because when we say that the excitation is some delta function, some impulse, then the transfer function is nothing but the response of the system. So that's what we are saying here. Since if I have a system, a circuit, which is defined by some transfer function, what does the transfer function depend on? What are the elements of the circuit? So this equation would come based on what is the kind of resistors or inductors or capacitors in the network. And based on that, I've got some transfer function. I've factorized the denominator and I know what are the poles. And based on the poles, I can directly observe that the impulse response of the system, h of t, is now going to take this form. And as long as P1, P2, and all these poles, right? If all these poles are all positive numbers, that means as t tends to infinity, each of these terms will go to 0. So I know that for stability, this is the characteristic I'm looking for. Okay. So this is the mathematical representation. practically it's very straightforward. All we have to see is that if the poles are positive numbers and my denominator is written as s plus p1, s plus p2 and so forth, that means the system is a stable system. If it is s minus p1, I already discussed in the earlier session, if it is s minus p1, then the exponential will become e power plus p1t, and then it's an exponentially growing function. Therefore, this system is unstable because it's not bounded. Okay. Now, if we remember, so maybe I'll just show you on the side that we had these various functions. You can see it here. Supposing I have a signal, okay, my signal is say a step function, h of my signal is u of t, then the Laplace transform of u of t is 1 over s. Where is the pole located for this? At s is equal to 0. When s is equal to 0, you get the pole. In the second case, supposing I have a ramp function. So ramp function is where the function is increasing constantly, and this function, if I put limit as t tends to infinity, this function goes to infinity. That means it's an unstable system. Okay, and if it is a ramp function, then I know that the Laplace transform is h of s is 1 over s square. And because it is 1 over s square, there are two poles, p1 and p2, which are both equal to 0. Because ideally I would have written this expression as sum a by s plus b by s square. Or in another way to look at it, you can say that there is a duplicity of poles. There are two poles, both are happening at s is equal to 0. Okay. So these are different kinds of functions. I have a step function, ramp function. What if I were to have a sinusoidal function? Then where are the poles of a sinusoidal function? We studied this last time, right? Can you tell me what are the poles of a sinusoidal function? Who can tell me what are the poles? I can't read your text messages, so if you have to speak.
S plus j omega, S minus j omega.
Plus j omega and s plus minus j.
Correct. Correct. So the poles are located at okay. So these are complex poles. Earlier I had poles which were real numbers. That means s is equal to 0. If I have a function which is e power minus t into u of t, then where is the pole of this function? Correct? Therefore, wherever you have a pole, that is what comes into your exponent over here. And here, if you have the pole is happening at plus or minus j omega, then the answer is going to be e power j omega and j omega t and e power minus j omega t. And because you have these two terms, they'll again combine together and you'll again end up with either sine or cos omega t. Okay, something like that. So you can have poles which are of real type. That means like this, you have plus 1 and poles are minus 1. You can have poles which are of the imaginary type. That means they are plus or minus j omega. And you can have poles which are of the complex type. And that's what we studied when we looked at the RLC circuit. Because when we looked at RLC circuit, then we said that the system function is given by R plus Ls plus 1 over SC. This was H of S. Okay. And because this was H of S, then this actually became a function which is like S divided by S square plus R over L into S plus 1 over RC. I just rearranged the terms. And here you can see that in the denominator, this is like a second order equation. So the roots, I can write this as, of the form that it is. This is of the form x square plus ax plus b. So the expression will become x minus a plus or minus root of a square minus 4b square by 2, right? So something like that. So you'll get these two poles. So in this case, you actually end up having complex poles. So you have a real part, and you can have this which may be real or imaginary depending on what is the relative magnitude of A and B, right? What was A over here? R by L. And what is B? It is 1 by RC. So these are all the things you can have various combinations. Poles can be real, poles can be imaginary, poles can be complex. So what we can do is, now that we know that S has these values, S can be a real value or an imaginary value or a complex value, you can have a plot. In this plot, you have two axes. You have the real axis, which we call as sigma, and we have the imaginary axis, which we call as j omega. And you know that we wrote S is equal to sigma plus j omega, right? In the earlier class, we said that S is complex frequency, and sigma is the real part of it, and the j omega is the actually frequency part of it. So this was in Webers per second, and this was Nepers per second. At that time, we did not know what it meant. We just said, S is sigma plus j omega, and we remembered that there's a real part and imaginary part. But now you can see what the relationship is. So depending on the position of the poles, or depending on the nature of the poles, S takes on those values. That means a pole is that value of S for which the transfer function blows up. So in some cases, the S can be real. In some cases, the pole can be real, the pole can be imaginary, or the pole can be a complex combination of the two. So if I'm given a function like what I did earlier, that h of s is minus p1 minus p2, these are the poles of h of s, then I can directly plot them on this figure. Okay, this is called the S plane. Okay, or the complex plane. So now when we draw the poles or zeros, we usually represent the poles by these crosses. Okay, when I put a cross, it means it's a pole. If I put a circle, it means it's a zero. So I can put a circle like this. This is a zero, or this is a zero. Okay, I can draw these circles or these crosses on the S plane. Now, what you will notice are some interesting features. That is, supposing I have a pole at minus P1. Okay, that means the pole is, the denominator is S plus P1 of my transfer function. The pole is located at minus P1. P1 is a real number. So on the real axis, I'm putting the value minus P1. I'm putting a cross over here. So when I draw this figure, I can directly see that if I have a cross at minus P1, what is my response going to look like? I know that there is going to be a term called some constant a times exponential of minus P1t. So if I just give you a figure, if I just draw this figure, this is the real axis, this is the imaginary axis, and I draw a few crosses and zeros, you can directly recover the entire transfer function, and you can get the answer of what is the response going to look like. Fine. So if you look at the pole is at minus P1, and there is a pole at minus P2, and then there is a pole at minus P3. Okay. If I have these three poles, which one will decay the fastest? I have the response of my system is going to be a into e power minus p1t, a2 e power minus p2t due to this term, and due to this term it will be some a3 times e power minus p3t. So which of these will decay the fastest? Because if you look at the response, it is just exponential decaying.
P3.
P3. Why?
So because say it is multiplied by time t, so when e की power minus t, so time will increase, so that the minus power minus power will be decreased much faster.
Correct. So that means you can say that if I'm having the poles on this real plane, the farther away I'm from the origin, the faster my function is going to decay. So if I have a pole which is close to the origin, then it will not decay very fast. But a pole which is far away from the origin will decay very fast. Okay? Everybody is clear about this? What if I have a pole at the origin? So let's take again some, let's draw it separately. Let's say this is sigma, this is j omega. Okay. Let's say I have a pole at the origin. What is the response of this system?
This will be a constant function, ma'am. Sir.
It will be a constant function. On what basis are you saying that?
Because if the poles are 0, then the exponential term will becomes 1.
Yes, because if the pole is at 0, then the response is e power minus 0t, that's equal to 1, right? So if I have a pole at the origin, that means my response is a constant. In other words, when I say I have a pole at the origin, then what I can write it as h of s is equal to 1 over s, right? Because s is equal to 0 is the pole. That means or instead of r h of s, let me call it as r of s, the response. That means r of t is equal to u of t, right? U of t is nothing but 1. So that's how we are getting this u of t. So we said in general, if I have a pole which is written as 1 over s minus a, this is exponential of minus at into u of t, right? So now you can understand how this term came. So if it is just 1 by s, that means this a is 0. So this 0 goes in the a and therefore this part vanishes. So when I say 1 by s, I'm only left with u of t. Remember we had this formula in the Laplace transforms. So a pole on the origin means that I have a constant function at the output. What if I have two poles at the origin? So now it's a double pole, okay? It has a duplicity.
So the denominator will be square.
The denominator will be square, very good. So that means r of s is equal to 1 by s square. So what can you tell about this function? What is r of t? Remember, this is a ramp function. So it is t times
TUT.
Yes. And because it is t u of t, that means the response is always increasing. So this function is not bounded. Okay, this is unstable according to our definition. So if I have a single pole at the origin, then I have a step function which is stable. If I have a double pole at the origin, it is unstable. What if I have a system which looks like, let's say I'll remove this double pole. Okay, let me just remove all this. Let's say that I have a pole over here. Is this a stable system?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I make this a double pole. Is this a stable system? What do you think? Sorry, it should have been plus over here. Yeah. So this is my function now. Is this stable or unstable? What is the R of t for this? It is t times e power minus at. Okay. So now tell me, is this stable or not?
Stable.
Why?
Because the exponential function decreases more faster than the multiply with t.
Correct. Very good. So therefore, although I have a double pole, if I have a double pole at some point on the left side over here, then it is a stable system. But if I have a double pole at the origin, it is unstable system, because then I have just t into u of t. But if I have a double pole anywhere over here on the left side, then I get the t multiplied by an exponential term, and the exponential term decays faster. Therefore, as long as I have a double pole somewhere over here, I'm in a safe position. But if I have a double pole at the origin, it is unstable. Okay. Then we also saw the case, like when I had the sinusoidal function, I showed you on top here that when I have the sine omega t, it is s square plus omega square, and then the poles are at s is plus or minus j omega. Okay. So if I have a pole at plus or minus j omega, some j omega, okay, and when you see these kind of poles, it means you have a complex function. Okay, that means you have a sinusoidal function. It's interesting that if you look at the Laplace transform of sine omega t, it is omega by s square plus omega square. What is the Laplace transform of cos omega t? It is s divided by s square plus omega square. In both cases, the denominator is s square plus omega square, and the expansion of s square plus omega square is s plus j omega and s minus j omega. Therefore, you will always find that if a pole appears on here on the j omega axis, it will be matched by another pole on minus j omega. They always come in pairs. Okay. So if you ever see a system that looks like this, that means you don't have this. This is wrong. This is not possible. Okay. If you see something on plus j omega, you have to see something on minus j omega for any physical signal. Because if you don't have the minus j omega, then your answer becomes imaginary. And in our real circuits, we don't have any imaginary elements. So you always have complex elements, and the real part of it is the real circuit. So what all did we understand? We understood, let me ask you this question. Supposing I have a pole over here. Sorry. Supposing I have a pole over here. Is this stable or unstable?
Unstable.
Okay, why is that?
So because it is unbounded and approaches infinity.
And approaches infinity because this represents the term e power at.
80, where a is a positive.
Correct. So that means always you have to, if you want a stable system, the stable system should always be on the left side of the S plane. Okay. So now if you look, if I just give you this graph and draw a bunch of poles, you can directly tell. First of all, for the system to be stable, everything should be on the left side. Nothing should be there on the right side. On the left side, I can have duplex poles. I can have duplicity of 2. That means I can have 2 poles sitting at the same value. But at the origin, I cannot have duplicity of 2. At the origin, there can be only 1 pole. If there is 1 pole, then it is equal to a step function. But if I have 2 poles at the origin, it becomes a ramp function. So that does not work for me. So the conditions for stable system are, first of all the poles should be on the left side. The poles can have a duplicity or higher multiplicity as long as they are on the left side. If they are on the origin, then it does not work. It has to be only simple pole. I can have a pole which is on the j omega axis. And if I see a pole on the j omega axis, I should know that immediately it is accompanied by a complex conjugate. And because these are complex conjugates, the function that you will get in the end is either sine omega t or cosine omega t. So can you tell me, is this stable or unstable? These two poles. I'm getting sine omega t or cosine omega t. Is this stable or unstable?
Stable, sir,
Stable.
because the value
Stable.
of both the functions are bounded.
Correct. So sine and cosine are both bounded functions. Their maximum value is 1 and minimum value is -1. Therefore, even on the complex axis, you can have poles, but the pole should always appear as complex conjugates. Then it is a stable system. So you can have these complex conjugates, you can have poles at the origin, and you can have poles on the left side. If they are on this complex plane, then you have to be careful that they have to be simple poles. They cannot be double poles. Okay, this is the important point. Then what if I have zeros? I can also have zeros, right? So I can say that I have a 0. It is more difficult to figure out. As such, zeros do not cause the system to blow up. But if I put a 0 here and ask you what is the transfer function of the system, such that this is A, this is B, this is C, and so forth, then the transfer function of the system is what? It is S minus B divided by S minus A whole square. And then if you want to consider the j omega poles, you can say it is S plus j omega, S minus j omega. Okay. Remember one thing, in the denominator when I'm writing S minus j omega, where is the pole located? Pole is located at plus j
Right
omega.
side.
Yeah. So this plus j omega term you're seeing here, the pole, corresponds to S minus j omega. And when I write S plus j omega in the denominator, that pole is actually at minus j omega. Okay. So just be careful not to interchange these two. Not that it will matter too much, but S plus j omega comes in the negative side and S minus j omega comes in the positive side. And then S minus a square is over here and S minus b is in the numerator. Now you can see one thing also. Normally we say that poles are what is causing the system to blow up, right? If S is equal to A, then this transfer function goes to infinite. So these are like the critical frequencies. They are called the critical frequencies. Supposing I have a system who's got a transfer function that looks like I have a double pole over here. Okay. That means this is an unstable function because we said this is a ramp function. Supposing I put a 0 over there. Now is this function stable or unstable? What do you think?
Could you explain again what you said?
If I were to write the transfer function, that means since I have two poles in the denominator, I have 1 by s square, and I have a 0 in the numerator, which is s. So this s and square will cancel. I will be left with 1 by s. So again, it will become a stable system. That means whenever I have a 0 coinciding with a pole, they cancel out each other because it is straightforward. The numerator is equal to denominator, it will cancel out. So if I have to design the system, and this fun stuff will start, when you do your analog circuit design, where you have a circuit, you're given a circuit and it looks like this, then you will get the question that this circuit is unstable. If I want to make it stable, what should I do? For example, if I have an unstable system, I'll say put a 0 on top of the pole. If I have to put a 0, what does it physically mean? How do I get a 0? When I'm talking about a real circuit, I have three elements, right? I have resistor, I have the inductor, which becomes Ls, and I have capacitor, which becomes 1 by Sc. So I have to incorporate one of these elements. I have to incorporate either an inductor or a capacitor into the circuit, so that when I'm writing out the transfer equation, either this S will come in the numerator or the inductor will be on the numerator. So I have to do some circuit design by introducing either an inductor or a capacitor, so that I bring an extra S that will cancel the denominator S. Okay, so this is where it is all going. So when I give you a circuit from the analysis perspective, like what we saw on top, if I have a simple RL circuit or something, now I know how to write the poles of the system and I know how to represent it. Supposing I have an unstable system, then what will happen is I can add some new element to the system so that I can cancel out the instability. Okay. So this is where the circuit design part is. So then let me summarize on this figure now. If you have a pole which is on these different parts over here on the real axis, those are like the decaying exponential terms. If I have a pole on the complex axis over here, these are of course zeros, but if I have these over here, then I have the sinusoidal or cosine function. What if I have poles over here, somewhere in between? Then this term is some real part and some imaginary part, okay? Therefore, this has both exponential decay and sinusoidal. So this is what that function looks like. So there is going to be an exponentially decaying function and there is going to be a sinusoid also. So if I'm purely on the imaginary axis, only sinusoid. If I'm purely on the real axis, only exponential decay. And if I'm in some part in between, then I have both exponential decay and sinusoidal function. And we saw this where? We saw this when we were solving the RLC circuit. Fine. And similarly, if I have a pole over here on the right side, then we said that right side means my function is exponentially increasing. But because I also have a complex component, and remember that if I have a complex number over here, x, it has to be accompanied by another x. They always have to be symmetric. Otherwise, it's not a real system. So if I have this kind of poles, then it is exponentially increasing function with superimposition of a sinusoid. Okay. So in this way, you can quickly figure out how, if I have a simple S-plane figure, I just draw a few crosses and circles, I can quickly tell you what is my entire circuit behavior. Okay. So we talked about the simple poles. We talked about poles with some multiplicity, and similarly, you can have zeros. Poles and zeros will cancel each other. Poles and zeros are called the critical frequencies. Complex poles will always appear in conjugates. Okay. And when I'm when I'm calculating the response, then there is some excitation and then there is a transfer function. And I know that the transfer function gives me some terms, excitation gives me some terms, like I'm applying a sine omega t signal, and my transfer function may be RLC circuit. Corresponding to both of them, I get some set of poles. I get some poles which are just due to the transfer function, and these are called the natural response of the system. Okay. And in addition, I apply some forcing function, and due to them also I get some poles. Okay. So when the system is stable, it means the poles and zeros are on the left plane. And if they're on the j omega axis, then they have to be simple, whether it's origin or anywhere on the j omega axis. So then I have a couple of examples here. The first one is showing that I have a RLC circuit. So I have R, SL, and 1 over SC. Fine. And let's say that this is like a 2-port. I can have a 2-port network where I have 1, 1 prime and 2, 2 prime. And then there is some voltage V0 across the capacitor initially. So if I want to find the transfer function, that means I want to find out what is the ratio of V0 by Vs, V0 and Vs. Then I write it as 1 by SC divided by R plus SL plus 1 by SC. I mean, this is simple algebra. Okay, we have already gone through this. And based on that, you get some poles of the system. And those poles will, you can refer to the previous class. I've actually solved this whole thing, where you will get the poles as minus alpha naught plus or minus alpha naught square minus omega square. And if you were to go ahead and see what is the ratio of alpha and omega naught, based on that, you will get the over-damped response or critically damped response, or you will get the complex poles which are stable but oscillating. Okay, it's a stable system but continuously oscillating. So all of these cases you can now plot on the S-plane and see what it looks like. And finally, you may have a circuit question that looks like this. Supposing you're given a circuit, okay, there is a resistor, it's a T network. So I have 2 resistors and then I have a capacitor in between, and I have a voltage source, and then I have a dependent voltage source. Okay, so that this voltage source, the second dependent voltage source, it depends on the current in the first mesh. I have two meshes here, right? I have, this is one mesh and this is one mesh. So in the first mesh, if I were to consider the equation, then if I'm applying some voltage Vi, then that voltage is equal to the, using Kirchhoff voltage law. So it is basically R plus 1 by SC is the total flow of due to current I1 across this mesh, and minus I2 by SC, because the current flowing through this is actually I1 minus I2. Okay. And similarly, you can write the equation for the second mesh, and then you can do some, you can solve it out, and based on the solving you will find out what are the what do you say, the expression for the circuit to be stable, because I'm having this expression in terms of K and I want to find out for what value of K is the system stable. So I've written out all the elements in terms of R and S and R, L and C. I mean R and C are written in terms of the S over here. That means these are all the transform quantities, transform impedance. Okay. And based on the transform impedance, I have a relationship for V and I. And based on that, you can find out, say, what is the determinant and all that. So I've just worked it out. I'll share the notes with you and you can take a look at it. But main thing I want to convey today is that understanding of this curve. Okay. So this is basically the stability analysis. Based on this, you can quickly figure out when the circuit is stable or unstable. And then normally, if you always have resistors, inductors, or capacitors, you can never have an unstable system, right? It will always be stable, because instability means energy has to come from somewhere to make the response become unbounded. So that energy is coming from somewhere when you have some active element in the circuit. So when I have an active element, then it is supplying some energy which can make the circuit unstable. So then I have to find out what is the bounding condition on K, for example. And then I could solve this set of equations. This is nothing but, voltage and current. And based on that, you find out what are the values of currents. And then there is a determinant. And you have to make sure that when the system is becoming unbounded, it means that determinant is a positive number. Otherwise, when you're solving it, that determinant will, if it goes to 0, then this value becomes infinite. And if this value becomes infinite, it is an unbounded system. So for it to stay bounded, you have to keep the determinant finite. And based on that, you get some simple answer. Right? So that's about all I'll share today. And if you have any doubts, you can ask me now.